Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to read a journal style story about the Oregon Trail, and we're going to talk about the key events that have happened according to the journal entry. Now, a journal entry is like a diary. Many people write in a journal or a diary to talk about what has happened in their day-to-day life. They write down events and they may even write down how they feel about these events or happenings. Usually, a journal entry has a date. This shows the date that people write the journal entry, and then they usually start it with Dear Diary. Sometimes they don't. They talk about what happened that day, maybe how they felt about it, and then sometimes they put their name at the end. Sometimes they don't. This person did. This little girl signed it, yours truly, Edith. So we know that the girl who wrote this journal, her name is Edith, and she's talking about her experiences on the Oregon Trail. Now, the Oregon Trail is a trail that people took from a city called Independence. That was in the state of Missouri. So here we are in California, up in Northern California. Missouri was way over here. So people took a trip going from Independence, Missouri, all the way over to Oregon on this trail called the Oregon Trail. They did this back in the 1800s, from the early 1800s to about the mid 1800s. Why did they do that? Well, when you grew food or crops in Missouri, sometimes the weather would be really harsh and it would ruin the crops. The crops were the way that was the way that farmers would get money for their families. Well, if the weather ruins your crops, no money for your families. And so many people heard that in Oregon, the weather was nicer, there was a lot of rain, and you could get a lot of land for free as long as you promised to grow food or crops on it. So they said, well, we're tired of being broke. We're going to go to Oregon City, Oregon, and spread out throughout Oregon and get some land and grow crops and not have the weather kill our crops. Other people went west along the coast so they could find gold and get very rich. So I'm going to have the computer read these journal entries about the Oregon Trail, and then we'll talk about key events that happened in the journal entry.
Short read 1. Remember to annotate as I read. The Oregon Trail, May 17th, 1849. Dear Diary, we've been on the Oregon Trail for 2 weeks. I'm exhausted. Papa and I walk one another in the baby ride. Papa says it's because our weight would be too much for the mules. Yours truly, Edith. June 29th, 1849. Dear Diary, rain, rain, and more rain. Now the trail's more like soup. Today our wagon got stuck in the mud. As a result, our wheel broke. It was another setback. Yours truly, Edith. July 15th, 1849. Dear Diary, sunrise brought a magnificent sight. With buffalo grazing on the plain. Our provisions had been getting low, so we stopped at another village. I traded some idle pants for more supplies. Yours truly, Edith. August 1st, 1849. Dear Diary, we have arrived at Soda Springs. The water has bubbles in it like soda water. We are going to stay here for an extra day because we need the rest. We can bathe in the hot springs, and Mama says the water is great for making bread. Yours truly, Edith.
Ba-dee-dee-ding! I always love that. Sorry about the phone ringing in the middle of that. I'm sure you still heard the story. Okay, so on these 2 pages, we have 4 journal entries. One was on May 17th, the next on June 29th, the next on July 14th, and the next on August 1st, and they were all in the year 1849, so about the middle of the 1800s when people were going on the Oregon Trail, and before that, like I said. Now let's talk about these 2 journal entries, and we'll talk about key events or important events that happened just in those 2 journal entries. So the computer read to us that they've been on the Oregon Trail for 2 weeks. Edith was exhausted. Papa and her walked while Mama and the baby rode in the wagon. Papa says it's because our weight would be too much for the mules. So what would be a key event that happened just in this journal entry? I guess the key event would be that they've been on the Oregon Trail for 2 weeks and they were already exhausted, at least Edith was. It actually took about 5 months to get from Independence, Missouri to Oregon City, Oregon. So imagine if you're exhausted after 2 weeks, think about how exhausted you would be after about 150 days. Wow. Okay, so Edith was tired. Okay, that's a key event. And then in the second journal entry, we read that there was a lot of rain and their wagon got stuck. That was actually a very common event. When you were traveling west on the Oregon Trail, your wagon wheels would often get stuck in the mud. So a wheel broke. That means they had to stop and fix it. That's called a setback. When you're set back from your goal, when you have to stop going somewhere to deal with a problem. So the wheel broke on the wagon would be another key event. Okay, now let's look at these 2.
1849.
Oops, sorry about that. Let's look at these 2 journal entries right here. All right, make a little text box. And let's take a look at the journal entries. What were some key events that happened here? Well, they saw buffalo, right? Also, they mentioned that, or she mentioned in her journal entry that they stopped at an Indian village and traded supplies. So they needed some things. So they said to some of the Indians in this Indian village, hey, we have some iron pans. Can you give us some of your, well, it doesn't say what the supplies they wanted were, but they probably traded the iron pans for maybe, oh, I don't know, food, possibly. So they traded supplies. So they saw buffalo and they traded supplies. That would be a couple of key events in this journal entry. Down here, it said that they arrived at a place called Soda Springs and they stopped there to rest. So that would be a key event. Mama also made bread, but I wouldn't call that a key event. I would call that a detail. But the main important event was that they arrived at the Soda Springs to rest. So let's write that. And now we have found the key events in the journal entries of the Oregon Trail.